There's a pattern in history that almost no one wants to talk about. In 1913, a financial network quietly centralized control over money and information, and within a generation, governments that challenged it collapsed. In 1974, evidence of elite criminal leverage surfaced, then vanished, while banks expanded their power and silence became policy. In 2008, trillions of dollars disappeared overnight, not because of chaos, but because decisions had already been made behind closed doors. Different centuries, different players, same outcome, concentrated finance, protected elites, total immunity. And right now, in 2025, a modern system is following the exact same sequence, step by step, almost perfectly. And here's what should terrify you. Every time this pattern reaches its final stage, the public only understands what happened after the damage is permanent. Careers erased, institutions hollowed out, truth buried under legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. This is the story of elite financial blackmail systems, Epstein, banking silence, and once you see the pattern, you won't be able to unsee what's coming next. Before we go through this pattern, you need to understand what elite financial blackmail systems actually mean. Not in textbooks and practice. This isn't just about money or crime or individual scandals. It's about how power is stabilized when information becomes more dangerous than weapons. At first, these systems look chaotic, isolated crimes, rogue individuals, regulatory failures. But then the structure becomes visible. Certain people are protected. Certain institutions are never touched. Certain investigations quietly stop. This isn't about corruption in the abstract. It's about leverage. When financial institutions, intelligence networks, and legal systems intersect, control doesn't come from force. It comes from silence. When the right information is held by the right intermediaries, entire governments become manageable. At first, the public sees accountability, arrests, headlines, promises. But behind the scenes, the incentives shift. Banks absorb risk, courts delay, media attention fades, and the system survives intact. That's not theoretical. That's documented history. Every time a blackmail finance structure fully matures, exposure doesn't destroy it. Exposure strengthens it. Because once everyone knows but nothing happens, the message is clear, resistance is futile, participation is rewarded, silence is enforced. When this process begins, it doesn't happen slowly, it accelerates. Legal settlements replace trials. Financial penalties replace prison. Names disappear from documents. And by the time the public realizes the pattern, the institutions responsible are larger, richer, and more insulated than ever. Let me show you how this happened 3 times before, and why the same structure is forming again right now. Let's start with Imperial Spain. By 1550, Spain was the most powerful empire on earth. It controlled territory across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Silver from Potosi and Zacatecas was flooding into Seville at a rate of more than 150 tons per year. By 1560, Spain controlled roughly 80% of global silver production. On paper, it was unstoppable. But here's the critical detail people miss. Spain didn't control the system that moved the money. German banking families like the Fugger and Welser houses financed the crown, managed its debts, and controlled access to credit. By 1557, King Philip II had already borrowed more than 36 million ducats. That's the equivalent of hundreds of billions today. Spain wasn't rich, it was leveraged. At first, the arrangement looked like strength. Silver arrived, armies were paid, wars were fought. But then the pattern began. By 1560, over 60% of Spain's state revenue was pledged in advance to service debt. Future silver hadn't even arrived yet. It was already spoken for. The crown could not act without creditor approval. That's when silence became policy. When corruption scandals emerged inside the imperial administration in the 1570s, prosecutions quietly stalled. When nobles defaulted on obligations, records disappeared. Why? Because exposure threatened confidence, and confidence was the system. If lenders lost faith, Spain collapsed overnight. This is where it gets darker. In 1557, Spain declared its first sovereign default. Then again in 1575. And again in 1596. Each time the same thing happened. Public outrage, temporary blame, then renegotiation behind closed doors. Creditors were protected, officials were shielded. The system survived. But each cycle made Spain weaker. By 1600, Spain was importing nearly everything it consumed. Food, weapons, textiles, even ships. Domestic industry had collapsed because silver made imports cheaper than production. By 1620, inflation had increased prices by more than 400% compared to a century earlier. Ordinary Spaniards were being crushed, elites were insulated, and notice the silence. There were no public trials of the bankers, no exposure of the full debt structure, no accountability for those who engineered the dependency. Because revealing the truth would have destroyed the system holding the empire together. By 1640, Spain's military expenditures exceeded revenues by millions of ducats annually. By 1650, its navy had shrunk dramatically. Territories began breaking away. Portugal seceded in 1640. The Netherlands were effectively lost. The empire was hollow. But the end didn't come with a bang. It came with paperwork, contracts, refinancing, legal mechanisms that transferred risk downward while protecting those at the top. By 1700, Spain was no longer a global hegemon. It still existed, but the system that once ruled the world was gone. That's what financial leverage combined with institutional silence looks like. Not sudden collapse, controlled decline. No accountability, no reckoning, just managed decay. And this is the key lesson. Spain didn't fall because it lacked resources. It fell because it surrendered control of its financial arteries. Once that happened, exposure became dangerous. Truth became destabilizing, and silence became survival. That was the first time the pattern fully played out. Let's jump forward almost 3 centuries. The British Empire. By 1870, Britain controlled roughly 25% of the world's land surface and more than 20% of its population. London was the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling backed nearly 60% of global trade. British banks financed railways in India, mines in Africa, and governments across Latin America. Power flowed through ledgers, not just battleships. At first, the system looked unbreakable. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, had perfected sovereign debt management. By 1850, Britain was producing over 50% of the world's manufactured goods. Its elites believed they had solved the problem of empire permanently. Just like Spain, the critical mistake was invisible. Britain stopped producing and started intermediating. Finance replaced industry. By 1900, manufacturing had fallen below 32% of GDP, while finance and services dominated London's economy. Capital no longer built domestic resilience. It extracted global rent. And this is where the pattern repeats. By 1914, Britain's national debt exceeded $700 million. During World War I, it exploded past $7.4 billion. That's more than 200% of GDP. To survive, Britain quietly transferred financial primacy to the United States. Gold reserves were shipped to New York. War debts were refinanced through American banks. The empire won the war, but lost control of its financial core. Just like Spain, silence became policy. Banking scandals involving war, profiteering, surfaced in the 1920s, then vanished. The 1929 crash exposed massive leverage inside British financial institutions. But prosecutions were rare. Reforms were cosmetic. Why? Because exposing the full system would have shattered confidence in sterling. And sterling was already fragile. Here's where it gets worse. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard. Sterling collapsed by nearly 30%. The empire survived politically, but financially, the pattern had locked in. By 1945, Britain owed the United States $4.33 billion under the Anglo-American loan. Repayments lasted until 2006, an empire reduced to a debtor. Just like Spain, industry hollowed out. By 1970, British manufacturing employment had fallen by millions. Finance remained protected. The City of London adapted, rebranding itself as an offshore hub. Secrecy jurisdictions expanded. Capital flows were shielded. Accountability disappeared. Notice the repetition. Just like Spain, defaults were reframed as restructurings. Decline was managed, not admitted. Elites transitioned smoothly. The public absorbed austerity. Different century, different continent, same pattern. Britain didn't collapse overnight. It declined through contracts, debt agreements, and silent transfers of power. The empire faded, but the financial architecture survived and embedded itself deeper into the global system. History was repeating. The same sequence, the same silence, the same outcome. Now let's look at the most recent example, one you probably remember, the Soviet Union. By 1980, the USSR controlled territory spanning 11 time zones. It commanded the world's largest standing army. It possessed over 39,000 nuclear warheads. On the surface, it looked immovable, but underneath the system was already compromised. The critical vulnerability wasn't military, it was financial and informational. By the late 1970s, the Soviet economy was stagnating. Growth had fallen below 1% annually. Oil exports made up more than 60% of hard currency earnings. When oil prices collapsed in 1986, revenues dropped by nearly 50% in 2 years. The system couldn't absorb the shock. At first, leaders tried secrecy. Internal reports warned of insolvency by 1985. Those reports were classified publicly. Stability was projected, just like Spain, just like Britain. Then came acceleration. By 1987, Soviet banks were quietly negotiating with Western financial institutions for credit access. By 1988, elite officials were moving assets abroad. In 1989 alone, an estimated $50 billion left the Soviet Union through capital flight. That's money that never came back. Here's the key detail people overlook. The collapse wasn't chaotic, it was managed. Compromising information about party officials, financial irregularities, and offshore accounts created leverage. When reforms began under Mikhail Gorbachev, they weren't guided by ideology alone. They were constrained by exposure. Silence protected exit pathways. And this happened fast. Spain took over a century to decline. Britain took decades. The Soviet Union collapsed in under 6 years. From 1985 to December 26, 1991, the state dissolved. 15 countries emerged. The economy shrank by more than 40%. Life expectancy fell. Savings were wiped out. Elites didn't suffer equally. By 1995, a small group of insiders controlled the majority of former state assets. The oligarchs were born. Financial institutions survived. Power simply changed hands. No comprehensive trials. No full disclosures. No systemic accountability. Different ideology. Same pattern. 3 times. 3 empires. 3 collapses. All following the exact same sequence. And here's why that matters now. And here's what should terrify you. The modern global financial system is following the exact same pattern. Stage by stage. Not approaching it. Not flirting with it. Deep inside it. Stage 1 is leverage concentration. By 2024, global debt surpassed $313 trillion. That's more than 330% of world GDP. The United States alone crossed $36 trillion in federal debt in 2024, adding more than $1 trillion every 100 days. Check. Just like Spain pledging future silver, just like Britain mortgaging its empire, the future is already spent. Stage 2 is financial intermediaries replacing production. In 2025, finance, insurance, and real estate make up over 30% of U.S. GDP, while manufacturing sits near 11%. Check. The same shift Britain made before decline. The same hollowing Spain experienced when silver replaced industry. Stage 3 is institutional immunity. Since 2008, major global banks have paid more than $380 billion in fines for misconduct. 0 senior executives jailed. Check. Financial penalties replace accountability. Silence replaces trials. The system absorbs punishment as a cost of doing business. Stage 4 is information control. In August 2019, a high-profile financier with documented ties to global banking, intelligence agencies, and political elites died in federal custody. Court documents named institutions. Settlements followed. Media attention faded. No systemic exposure occurred. Check. Exposure strengthened the system instead of destroying it, exactly like before. Stage 5 is capital flight by insiders. Between 2020 and 2024, wealthy individuals moved trillions into offshore vehicles, private equity, and hard assets. In 2022 alone, over $1 trillion flowed into tax havens. Check. The Soviet pattern. Exit before collapse. Stage 6 is public cost transfer. Inflation peaked above 9% in 2022. Real wages lagged. Savings lost value. Housing affordability collapsed. Meanwhile, asset prices recovered rapidly. Check. Losses socialized. Gains protected. We're not approaching the pattern. We're at stage 6 of 7. Stage 7 is resolution, not reform. Resolution. That's when currencies reset, institutions consolidate further, and accountability becomes mathematically impossible. Spain reached it by 1700, Britain by mid-century, the Soviet Union by 1991. What comes next follows the math. Debt cannot grow faster than productivity forever. You cannot protect elites indefinitely without destabilizing the base. You cannot suppress truth permanently without consequences. Maybe it takes 10 years, maybe 5, maybe less. Since 2020, every stage has accelerated. This affects you directly. Your currency buys less. Your savings work harder for less return. Your job exists inside a system optimized for extraction, not stability. When resolution arrives, it won't feel like a movie moment. It will feel administrative. Policy changes, emergency measures, new frameworks, old rules quietly suspended. 3 times this happened before. Imperial Spain, the British Empire, the Soviet Union. Each believed they were exceptional. Each believed they had found a workaround. Each believed the rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong, every single time. We're telling ourselves the same stories right now, that technology will save us, that central banks have tools, that this time is different. But the pattern doesn't care about optimism. The pattern is mathematical, and math is undefeated. Maybe we find a way out. Maybe this system adapts in a way history never recorded. Maybe the cycle finally breaks. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. And history says we're about to learn the lesson the hard way. If this helped you see where we actually are in the sequence, stay close. Because when stage 7 arrives, understanding how we got there will matter more than ever. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in history, in the contracts, in the silence, and in the ruins left behind by every system that thought it was immune.